Hello, nerds for Yang.
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds!
Hello, nerds! So nerds!
Hello,
nerds!
Now with this campaign, bang, dang, it's and true. Come roll with the Yang Gang.
Hello,
nerds!
Josh from New Progressive Voice. Welcome to the Nerd Zone.
Hey, thanks for inviting me.
It's been a long time coming. You know, I think we have a lot of shared audience because I noticed when I tweeted out that we're going to do a show together, a lot of people were saying, oh, you know, I watch these two channels all the time. And I know when you were gracious enough to invite me to your program a few months ago, we had a great conversation and people seem to enjoy it. So I'm glad that we can keep this dialogue going. How are you doing today?
Yeah, doing good. It's Sunday and it's nice and bright here in California. It was raining this morning, and so things are cleaned out. The air's good. Yeah, so good start of the day.
Yeah, I woke up at like 5 in the morning to like intense thunder and lightning. And a little bit of rain, which I think we appreciated. Maybe not so much the lightning, but the rain was welcome.
Yep.
Yeah. Crazy times. So tell me a little bit about, for those who are less familiar with NPV, tell us a little bit about the channel and, you know, whatever you can share about yourself, because one of the things I noticed was you've been making content about policy and government well before the Yang Gang kind of really got a lot of traction. So you have a unique vantage point. You weren't a channel made for Andrew Yang. You were a progressive channel, and then Yang came along. So tell us a little bit about that story.
Yeah, so really, if you had asked me in 2015 who I might consider voting for, at that point, it would have been Clinton. I was really pretty much, I don't know if it's a blue or red pill, but I always get that confused, but I was pretty much asleep, is I guess another way of putting it. And Bernie came along. He really woke me up, and I knew I had to do something. I was never really involved in politics and not even interested in doing YouTube, but I made a video and it kind of went, I guess, semi-viral, got like 2,000 or 3,000. For me, it was viral, getting like 2,000 or 3,000 views. And I was like, hey, I'll just keep doing this because, you know, I really like this message. You know, people need health care, the growing gap between the rich and the poor, the military industrial complex. These are all like things that I didn't hear before. I mean, I kind of heard in the backdrop, but he brought it to the front, and I just knew that I had to be part of that change. It was really exciting. I think similar to what a lot of Yangers are feeling for the first time they're getting involved in politics, or they're drawn in. That's the same sort of thing that inspired me. But along the way, of course, a lot has transpired. We had Trump come on board, and we've had new candidates that come aboard that are also progressive. And along the way, I pretty much understood that really was what interested me, was the messaging about America needing change. And anybody that I thought was genuine or struck that chord, I also found I was drawn to, whether it was Marianne, whether it was Yang, Tulsi, or Bernie. In this case, those seemed to be the four that I found that were genuine.
Let's take a little trip down memory lane, and I'm gonna go to the New Progressive Voice, NPV, New Progressive.
Oh boy.
And well, number one, for people who are not familiar with your channel, they're going to get a little tour right now. Cool. Let's see if that'll work. Yeah. So New Progressive Voice. It's what is this tree called? It's a very famous tree. I saw it in Jordan a lot, actually.
Yeah, I'm not really sure.
Yeah, what the heck is that? Well, I'll look that up. I'll Google that later. But anyway, let's go to your videos here, and let's see if we can go back in time. How far? Oh yeah, you've been busy, my friend.
Mutated there, didn't it?
Wow. There's let's see, a year ago. We're gonna go back further than a year. So I got some early Yang stuff here. Some Tulsi, Marianne, a lot of policy deep dives. Look at you, man. You've been freaking working hard for the movement.
Yeah, for a while there, I was really putting out a lot of content.
Yeah. And so like what was do you remember the first one that you did? Was it about entirely about it wasn't
Andrew
about
Yang?
Yang.
Oh, okay.
The first video ever.
Ever. Oh, wow. Again, that was the one about Bernie, and it was just essentially talking about how I felt the DNC was cheating Bernie Sanders, that I think that we need to do something before it's too late, sort of the same degree
I've heard
of gravity
that narrative before.
yeah, that really where it all started. As far as Andrew Yang, I think he captured my attention early on because I already had taken an interest in universal basic income.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it might have been Joe Rogan or something prior to that, but I think it was right around that time that I was drawn in by his message. And then I went on to read his book, and at that point I was sold.
Look at you, man. We're going back 3 years now.
Yeah, it's you might have to do oldest video. I think there's
here we go. What do progressives believe? You're right. I should have reverse sorted it. I didn't realize how much there was. It's a treasure trove of content here. Why Hillary lost. That was a very shocking outcome for, I think, a lot of people. So it's fair to say that you've been in this game for several years now. And would you say now your content is mostly Yang or half Yang, quarter Yang? Like how much of it is Yang related versus just good old progressive kind of politics?
Well, I mean, more recently, I'd say in the last week or two, it's been just highlighting Biden's policies. But if you look in the context of, say, the past 2 to 3 months, or even the past 6 months, I would say that at least 50% is catered around Andrew Yang. I do find his message resonates with where I think we need to go as a nation. I do think Bernie, to me, was or is and will continue to be the one that inspired me to get into progressive politics. He's sort of the forefather of the new progressive movement. Most of his policies are where I find connection with him, and his drive for change and transformation are less on the sort of philosophical fundamental level. I think that we differ there. I consider myself more social democrat than democratic socialist.
Yeah. And what's your sense of, now that we look back on this primary? I was reflecting on this the other day, mainly looking at the current state of the race between Trump and Biden. And one of the things that occurred to me about this the Democratic primary was, maybe the Democratic primary voters were not that dumb.
Yeah,
I know there was this narrative like they just don't know about Andrew. They're sheep. But
yeah,
I
they're
think
catching on. Definitely, they're catching on.
They are catching on, and I think they made a strategic move to go with the low risk nominee that would be most assured to give Trump a real run for his money. Because if you imagine, if you were to ask Trump's team, who would you like to campaign against? I actually think he would prefer to campaign against Yang and say, oh, look at this Chinese, other socialist, communist, Maoist, they'll throw it all. They would have, Wuhan Andrew, right?
Right.
They would have loved to go against Andrew Yang. But now he has a campaign against a pretty establishment centrist and try and convince everyone that somehow Biden has overnight turned into this like Antifa Marxist, which it just falls flat. So I don't know, maybe we're giving the primary vote. I'm giving the primary voters too much credit. What do you think? Do you think they stumbled upon this, or do you think there was some intelligence there?
Yeah, I do think it's I think it's an awakening. I do think there is a good portion of the Democratic Party, unfortunately, I think are still unaware of the sort of underlining problems that plague America. But I do think we're, as a group, at least the Democratic Party, is growing in its awareness. Let's put it to you that way. However, I think some of this is also coincidental in that had we not had the coronavirus, had we not had some of the ways in which Trump responded to the coronavirus, my own thought might be that someone like Bernie Sanders might have been a stronger candidate, and Andrew Yang might have been a stronger candidate.
Right.
I say that because I think that in this time, things are so unpredictable with the coronavirus. People are looking for stability with the economy, the way Trump has sort of frying the pan approach to everything. People want that. They don't want radicalism. You know, they want to go back to some normalcy. And I think that Biden really sort of, epitomizes that, sort of integrates that mindset. So.
Yeah, maybe there wasn't some grand design here, but it just worked out in that, to your point, had we not had the coronavirus and the subsequent recession, and all of this kind of like instability, and it were just a more normal time and the economy was fairly okay, then maybe a Bernie message would have resonated more than a Biden one. But right now, I mean, I'm looking at those numbers and I'm like, oh, this is like a record level gap, way bigger lead than Hillary ever had. I think in the last 100 national polls, the best Trump did was he led by 4 points in like 2 of them. And that was back in December and February. Yeah. So, knock on wood. I mean, do you think this is a done deal, or do you think this is going to be a nail biter?
Yeah, I think a lot depends on, I point this out in one of my videos. I pointed out 4 things that are really going to determine whether Trump will go on to win. I think the first of those, which we already passed, is who is Biden's VP pick. I think that picking Kamala was a relatively good choice because I consider Biden to be right center and Kamala to be more left center. And so it gives that a sort of a nice center of the road that appeals to many people in a more less radical way. So that's the first one. I think Biden passed that one. I don't think it was flying colors. I think he could have picked a better candidate, but I think Kamala is definitely a
who would have been the flying colors pick?
Well, it would have been someone like Yang, obviously. But since he was going with female, anyone that would have drawn in independents or centrists would have been someone like Tulsi Gabbard, someone like, even though it would have been intuitive to the Democratic Party, I think in a general election it would have served Biden far more ultimately. Someone like Bernie, someone like Yang, someone like Tulsi would have been ideal.
Do you think a Yang or Bernie pick would have worked in this kind of BLM kind of police reform mode that we're in? I mean, that also seems like Biden almost had to pick an African American candidate. I don't know, but what you think it would have been okay?
That's a really good point. Yeah, I honestly can't say it might be sort of a washout in terms of appealing to the Democratic Party. But I also think, on the other hand, I get the notion that a lot of people are ready to move on from Trump, particularly Democrats, and I think he could have picked, Klobuchar, and most likely even a lot of people, among the BML, Black Lives Matter movement, still would have probably likely considered voting for Biden, or at least not voting for Trump. So I think at least Andrew Yang, he could have messaged Black Lives Matter in such a way that as a VP to sort of cater, because ultimately even Kamala is going to be the mouthpiece of Biden. I think ultimately you're going to hear less from Biden. It's going to be more, him talking during interviews or during the debates, but that's about it. So I think that you make a good point, but I don't think that the need to have picked an African American was a necessity. It might have lasted for about a week in the circuit, but ultimately I think people would have moved on from that and gone to the bigger message: do we want to stick with Trump or not?
one of the things you mentioned, originally, I guess I presume you voted for Hillary last time around.
No, actually, I voted for Jill Stein. Yeah,
Oh,
and my
okay.
number 2 pick was actually Gary Johnson. So
So
yeah,
you really felt like the DNC stuck it to Bernie, and you were like, "F that whole system."
yeah. I mean, it wasn't just it wasn't just that I believed that, but it was also that understanding progressivism is not about left or right. It's about whether or not we need change and how do we bring solutions and change to better the human condition. That ultimately is the message of what it means to be a progressive. And so it wasn't as though I was just stuck to the Democratic Party and I'm
Yeah.
just going to vote, whoever the nominee was. So
Yeah. The one thing I know is true from the 2016 data was that the African American vote did not turn out for Hillary in the way that they did for Obama. And a lot of people feel like that was a material factor. It wasn't the only thing, but it contributed to that kind of losing by a whisker phenomenon that we had. So I kind of look at Biden now picking Kamala and thinking, okay, that's great. We're going to activate very strong, a clear example of support for the African American community. Women voters are going to be fired up, hopefully. And then also the other benefit of Kamala is she used to be an AG, so you can't paint her as a burn the police station down candidate. If anything, she probably pisses off more progressives than she would like to. So exactly. I mean, I don't feel bad for the Trump campaign, but they have a real tough story to tell. I know they're trying to make her. I think the path they're taking now is that she's not really an American because her parents were from another country. And I don't know. Do you think that's going to land, or do you think that's going to get any mileage?
No, I don't think so. I think that I think most Americans will see past that. I think what really Americans are looking for in this election is the vision that Trump can set out for America, whether or not they're going to buy into his messaging or not. If he talks about money, UBI, if he talks about if the coronavirus numbers come down, if the economy comes back up, it's all going to be about timing and how everything comes together by November. Fortunately, I do feel generally optimistic, but maybe not quite as strongly as you do. I do feel Biden could really mess it up during the debates. That's another potential factor. Again, Trump could, a lot of America generally doesn't pay attention to what you say, and Trump is really good at speaking at both corners of his mouth, and just depending on what network you listen to, he's saying one thing and he's saying something else, and already you're seeing parts of the Yang Gang highlighting the idea that he's for UBI, and because he's talking about putting money in people's hands, thousands of dollars, as he said. So people, unfortunately, politics is like dog years. 3 months is like 21 months. So a lot can still happen, I think.
What do you think regarding the debate performances? I agree with you. If Biden has a really terrible night, it will only kind of reinforce the concern a lot of folks have about supporting him. I also think the expectations are pretty low. Like, I don't think he doesn't need to be Winston Churchill up there. He really just needs to kind of speak in a few paragraphs and hold it together. And I think people would be like, oh, I'm quite surprised. On the other hand, like with Trump, I actually feel like based on the last few press conferences that I've watched, his sort of ability to stay focused and to enunciate and speak coherently seems to be degrading, like week by week almost. But at the same time, I almost cannot imagine a scenario where his supporters will peel away no matter what he does in that debate. Like, he could literally fall over and throw up in like a garbage can and people would be like, "Wow, that's great! Look how strong he was. He was feeling sick, and he still showed up because he's a real American leader and all this kind of thing." Do you feel like the Trump base is that locked in, or do you think actually if he has a really tough debate performance, it actually could hurt him as much as it would hurt Biden?
It really is going to come down to the independent vote, is how I see it. And I do think that, if you look at Biden, you look at Trump, they're about equal when it comes to saying outrageous things. Trump's better at marketing it in his favor. Biden, it tends to hurt him for whatever reason. I don't know exactly why. Ultimately, the message is going to be about how do American people see themselves moving forward in relation to crises, like coronavirus or the economy, and do we have a strong leader? And how are we going to articulate ourselves on the world stage? And I think that if Biden can present a fresh sort of approach that puts himself as a strong leader, a competent leader, and less about Trump and how horrible he is, then I think that he'll probably just have a pretty easy way through, regardless of how he'll do in the debates. Trump, I don't think it's going to matter. He's unpredictable. He can say anything. He still shines. He's sort of Teflon John. So I don't really think that. Yeah.
Do you think the opposite is true? That I think we both seem to agree that if Trump has a terrible, embarrassing performance, his base will not have any change at all. What if Trump somehow surprised us and, showed great empathy and showed like mastery of facts and data and information, and was able to put together really logical, well-formed arguments? Do you think those independents would similarly kind of go towards Trump? Do you think that he could actually debate his way into a victory?
Yes, I do. I think that a lot of American people, unlike you and I, that's on Twitter, we got our YouTube channels, and people that follow us, we follow other people, and we're really engaged in politics. But the average American really is not. They just sort of look at headlines. They occasionally go on Twitter. They occasionally watch video here and there. And I think it's really going to be a matter of what happens in October, really, in the debates. And if Trump can come across as genuine, as caring, persuade American about his numbers, especially with India's numbers going up and other nations that surpass the U.S. And you say, hey, look here, we're not as bad as, media trying to paint it. I think he could still squeak by.
Interesting. Where do you think, are you looking at any states in particular, or are you more focused on the kind of ideological spectrum? Any thoughts on the geography of the race?
I'm looking at the West Coast. I think that he's going for something unpredictable. I'm looking at Pennsylvania. I'm looking at Oregon, Nevada, possibly Minnesota. Those are some areas that he really is trying to eat away at the base to surprise people. So I would not be surprised if we woke up and one of those states went over to Trump, perhaps Wisconsin, perhaps Minnesota even. Oregon, I think, would be more difficult, although I think he's chipping away at the numbers there. Florida might surprise us. He might still be able to pull that off, especially with all of the fanfare with the boats and trying to get people get into the Guinness Book of World Records for the number of boats, behind Trump. So he's really good at fanfare. He's really good at media. He's really good at drawing people in. He's good at excitement, and Americans love that. Americans eat that up. Bigger the better. Texas style. Whether we try to deny it or not, it's sort of in our DNA, and Trump represents that. He embodies that.
Let's take a look at what the gamblers are thinking here. Here's a map of the betting odds, and as you mentioned, Florida is one of those sort of 55, or I guess 56, 54, 46. Kind of bit of a toss up. Look at Arizona. Trump, I think, carried Arizona last time. And then you've got North Carolina freaking 50-50. That's exciting.
But I think part of
yeah.
the context for me would be looking back at 2016, and at this time, you know, they had similar numbers for Clinton, something like 70% in her favor to 20-something percent in favor of Trump winning. And of
The
course, we know what happened
probability.
there.
Yeah, it was
Right.
exactly the same.
But
Yeah.
you are right to look at this, you know, state by state. I think that's, you know, there's a little bit of difference there. However, I will
Yeah, I
grant you
mean,
that.
the fact that you know, there's any like heartbeat of activity in Texas for Democrats and tech, you know, it's just like stunning. It's you look at where Trump's support is these days, and it's basically, if you were to look at the map, it would seem like the dark red is, you know, effectively the parts of the country that have pretty much been left behind in kind of the last 20 years of economic growth that we've had. And so you can understand the frustration, and you just, I mean, it makes you then wonder, like, man, you know, Yang would have been a great message, because I don't think you can tell that sort of center and southeast part of the country, like, oh, don't worry, we're going to go back to the good old days and everything's going to be fine, because I think they know that was the Clinton, the Hillary message. Like, no, everything is not fine.
Right.
And I haven't heard Biden or Harris really to speak to that audience and acknowledge that things are not okay and we're going to try and do something about it. They seem to be more like, look, let's just at least un-Trump ourselves, but not much more at the moment. Do you think they need to speak more to these sort of truly economically harmed voters that maybe they felt like they had no choice but go with Trump?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I do think it ultimately hurts them, not only in, I think, you know, there's such a problem when we think about centrist Democrats, not only from the standpoint of the mainstream media, because they tend to highlight sensation and they focus a lot on Donald Trump, and they focus a lot on, you know, I don't know, just things that generally don't have to do with economics. And in social media, Biden's also hurt because, you know, it's everything about the DNC and how everything's wrong and nothing is right. And so there is that sort of a vacuum, you know, that there's no Biden. There's nothing positive. But if you look at his policies, you know, he really is one of the most progressive candidates we've had, I would say, since FDR. I know that sounds ridiculous, but if you really look at his policies, now it's a question of whether he's going to follow through or not. Now I'm talking about a nominee, of course, but obviously someone like Yang or Bernie would have been more progressive. But in terms of a nominee, you know, he's very progressive, and I think it would benefit him to discuss those. People often confuse being left and progressive as meaning the same thing, and they're not. And I think that working class people, you know, why they are jumping on to Yang is because they like his UBI. It's a progressive policy.
Yeah, I noticed you did some videos, and I did a couple on Biden policy. I was pleasantly surprised. I think I had this assumption that, well, he's just going to basically say the same crap that, say the same stuff that Hillary was saying, you know, kind of this incremental, just, you know, poke around the edges. But you look at what he's talking about, climate, you look at what he's talking about, certainly with the COVID response, with, you know, Medicare for all who want it kind of movement. That's pretty freaking progressive to me. Do you think, I'm guessing there was broad input on those policy positions on the website? I think you touched on the notion of like, well, will he actually follow through? What do you think? Like, do you think he'll actually go that far? Because that seems like a little bit of step to the left for where he used to be.
Yeah, I don't think it's really going to matter, because I think that if he does not follow through, we're in a different time, in a different space than 2016, 2015. I think that's where a lot of people get caught up in not wanting to vote Biden, as they think it's going to end up with the same outcome. I think we're seeing a different, a different context. But I think that if he doesn't follow through, someone like Kamala Harris is ultimately going to end up being the one that will hurt from that if she decides to run in 2024. And Yang Gang, Bernie camp, the Tulsa camp, even some Trumpers that might consider Biden because they like Yang and they're sort of riding on his coattails. I think they're going to want to look to Biden, or they're wanting something that is more stable and brings America back, brings its economy back. So if Biden doesn't follow through, I think he's ultimately going to hurt himself, and it's going to benefit us because that's going to increase the odds that we're going to lean into a progressive candidate in 2024. On the other hand, if he does follow through, then that I think will end up helping Kamala, presuming Biden doesn't do more than one term.
Right. And do you think are you in the camp that Kamala is sort of the presumed nominee for 2024? What's your take on that?
Well, yeah, I'd like to sort of change the dialogue on that, because I feel that part of the problem that people, progressives, or even well-minded conservatives have when they think about how political change happens, it's not really about who has the power. It's really about who comes out to vote. And unfortunately, the youth generally don't vote. Like if we look at this last primary, we had some great selections, had some great, Yang, we had Bernie, so forth and so on. I mean, the numbers were there if we had come out, but it was like 27% that were in X, Y, and Z, and something like 50, 60% that was boomers and older.
Yeah.
So it really is about captivating an audience. And I mean, you can see how Trump was elected with 25% of the voting population. So it really is about who activates and who makes it important, who prioritizes, who gets out, and who votes. That is really going to determine who. I don't think Kamala is, a promise in. Let's put it that way. I think we're in a different space. I think that people are more awake, more aware. They're going to pay attention. They're going to expect. They're going to, the rooster's going to come home to roost, as they say, if Biden doesn't follow through.
Yeah. I was quite surprised at the Iowa primary or Iowa caucus turnout by young people. I mean, you had Bernie and you had Yang with some of the best youth support around, and dudes did not, and gals did not turn out. It's like, the hell's going on? Like, where they were. I mean, obviously on Twitter,
question.
Right? Twitter, YouTube, it was crazy. And then you look at the caucuses in Iowa, and you're like, where the hell is everybody? Where's the Yang Gang? What do you think happened there?
I think it's sort of like putting the cart before the horse. I think a lot of people that is inexperienced in politics often will say, like, give me something to vote for, and then I'll come out to vote. They don't recognize that voting is what makes change happen. Not waiting for mommy or daddy, whether it be the Republican Party or Democratic establishment, giving you what you want because you're yelling or you're saying, I'm going to withhold my vote. That doesn't ultimately, I think in the grand scheme, it doesn't have as much weight than if you actually show up to vote and you actually activate and you get out the, growing vote and things like that. That ultimately is what wins the day.
Yeah, what I think the numbers that I saw were that there were more Iowa caucus voters this time around than in 2016, but far less than 2012 and 2008. And I don't know. I don't want to beat up on our fellow Yang Gangers that are in the millennial category, but like, I voted from Switzerland. I made I made sure that and even that was after he suspended
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it's like
Yeah.
cynicism, it breeds defeat is sort of the way I think of it. And I think a lot of times, whether it be Yang supporters or Bernie supporters, they see politics not happening at the pace they want. They see, Biden isn't saying the right things, Bernie's not saying the right things, or Yang didn't say this exactly the right way. And they sort of get into that perfectionistic trap, and they say, well, heck, I'm not going to vote, so what's the point? Like, he didn't say exactly what I wanted, or she didn't say exactly what I wanted, so they just sort of give up. um, and I think that that is ultimately what is the thing that's leading to things not happening, and things
Mhm.
going in the opposite direction of what we say we want, because then you're essentially inadvertently giving your power over to the opposition, that sort of the complete opposite to what you say is important to you.
So you were in that camp last time around where you were not happy with the Democratic ticket, and you took your vote elsewhere. What are you planning on doing this time around?
Oh no, this time it's Biden. Yeah, I can understand the mindset, because I was there in 2015, 2016. It's unfortunate, but the current election system isn't set up to cater to or make important or put on a debate stage a third party. So this idea that I never say like to say never. I'm not that type of person, but I definitely look at the math. Put on the thinking hat here, and the numbers just make it nearly impossible for a third party to win in the current election system. And I think that a lot of that, unfortunately, I learned a lot from it, but at the same time, it was somewhat vain, mainly out of ignorance. Not, the principle stand is a great thing, but ultimately, if it leads to the opposite of what you're standing for, I think uh, it's a losing battle. Let's put it that way. So it's Biden for me this time, and I'm willing to accept, uh, what he's putting forth. Whether I believe it or not, I'll give him an opportunity, and if he doesn't follow through, then I know the primary is where it's at.
Right.
We were given good candidates this go around. I think we'll be given even a better group of candidates upcoming in 2024.
Do you what's your sense when people make the argument that, hey, if a Jurgensen or Green Party or whoever gets a few percent, it'll be a huge wake up call for the party duopoly, and only then will we have real change. Therefore, it's okay if Trump gets reelected, because the third party write-ins will have a record percentage turnout, and that in the long run will affect more change than anything else.
Yeah, I would say I disagree with that. The Democratic Party caters to where the polls go, and also where the wins are. If Trump wins, then that's a blessing of the right-wing agenda. That means that the centrist establishment Democrats will look at that and say, hey, we need to move right if we want to win. That 1 or 2% will just be looked at as a pest. Go away, shoo shoo. You're a problem. Most likely will be blamed, such as Joe Stein was in 2016 as the reason why Trump was elected or reelected. I think it's completely opposite to what you ultimately want to see with that quote unquote strategy, unfortunately.
Yeah. And what's your sense of where Yang is these days? Like, I mean, let's start with the campaign suspension. Do you think that was the right call in hindsight? And how do you feel like he's doing so far?
I think at that time I thought it was premature, but looking at it, given the fact that he saw the ground game in Iowa was so weak, and he had spent a lot of money in that state, and he still didn't pick up a delegate, and then he went on and didn't pick up one in Vermont, New Hampshire also. I think that it was a smart decision ultimately, that he recognized that I need to regroup. I need to rethink and like take a different track. And it led to him getting a seat on CNN.
Mm-hmm.
He opened up his podcast. He's broadening his base. I think it was stellar. And again, like I said, political life is an odd animal, and in some cases it's real slow, in other cases it's very rapid. But I think if you look at the trajectory of Yang's campaign, I think it's phenomenally rapid. The fact that he can be competitive with AOC in this latest poll, I don't know if you saw one, but
Yeah.
that he can be competitive with Kamala Harris just in 2 years, a year ago, if you'd said Yang, people would have said, who is that? And even if
Right.
somebody knew who he was, they would have said, UBI, are you kidding me? That's a joke. And now 60% of America supports the UBI. So you have to credit Yang for that. I mean, that's, in a lot of ways, his branding, his approach, his marketing, I think is far more superior and brilliant than even Sanders.
Mm-hmm.
To me, Sanders is a fire starter, and Yang is the one that I don't really have an analogy for you or a metaphor, but I think he's the one that could possibly, unpack all this and, send it home.
Yeah. I was also pleasantly surprised by that 2024 primary poll. This was before, I think this one came out before Kamala was selected. But nonetheless, to your point, obviously Cuomo's been kind of in the news a lot. Harris was always kind of a top tier candidate, but you've got Yang there ahead of a senator, another senator, an almost senator, a VP in waiting, a well-known congresswoman. That's not bad. Top 5, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, look at the other one with the general election. I think he's tied for either first or second.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh, let me see if
his
I can
obstacle
find that.
really is going to be the getting through the Democratic primary. I really think that's going to be his biggest obstacle.
That's nuts. Yeah. What do you think is going to be the strategy that he's going to have to employ in 2024 to win over these hardcore kind of Democrats?
That's a good question. I don't think it's really the Democrats that he needs to concern himself with, because I think he is doing what he needs to do to appeal to that group with his podcast. He's reaching out to all kinds of people.
Mm-hmm.
He keeps doing that, and I think it's just really exponential. Ultimately, I just can't see how it isn't. I mean, just the momentum is in that direction, and with coronavirus, with the economy, with the momentum supporting UBI, I just don't see how he can't continue to grow into the Democratic Party and even some parts of the more moderate, independent thinking Republicans. I think his biggest challenge will be sort of the socialist group, the DSA, the Bernie camp, the hardcore Tulsi people. Those are the people I think, or even the hardcore Trumpers. Those are the one I think that really will be more difficult for him to regain sort of the trust, because I think that some of them may feel that they don't trust him for various different reasons, because they do appeal to opposite ends of the spectrum. That sort of carries with it, a benefit of, okay, I can get Trumpers, I can get Bernie, but it also has the negative of saying, well, because you can get Trumpers, I don't really trust you. Because you can get Bernie people, I don't really trust you. So that's where I think he's going to have his most challenge.
Yeah, I remember when Obama was running. There was this was a long time ago, but I was in the Washington State caucus at that time. They were still doing caucuses in Washington State, and I was advocating for Obama against Hillary. And I was like, hey, look, I voted Republican all my life, and I'm switching parties for this guy. And actually, people in the caucus were saying that's why we can't support Obama, because he's not a real Democrat. That he's appealing to too many Republicans and independents. Right. And it's like, well, Jesus, like we're trying to run the country here. Like there half the country
Yeah.
is not Democrat.
Right.
So like,
Right.
it's not bad that you have someone that appeals, but I could see why, like from a purity test point of view, people do get a little bit suspicious when they're like, wait a minute, you know, why is Yang getting so many independents and Trump supporters curious about him?
Right. People
Well,
might perceive him sort of middle of the road and non-committal. Yeah.
let me ask you, as a sort of long-time progressive, and I'm more of a center left kind of guy, probably more center than left, frankly, with a little libertarian sprinkle in there. I love UBI because I feel like it does two things. It delivers help to everyone, and it provides a floor for everyone. It could have like the biggest impact on poverty probably since like the New Deal. But I also like it because it doesn't require a ton of government planning and bureaucracy and opportunity for waste and fraud and that kind of thing. And you know, I don't want to feed into the AOC narrative that it's a Trojan horse, but how do you as a progressive feel about a world where we might have more UBI and maybe less, or at least less growth in traditional social programs to free up resources to have a more robust UBI?
Yeah, I mean, as a progressive, I support that. I think that oftentimes, unfortunately, in modern times, people have misunderstood progressivism and being Democrat or being left or liberal meaning the same thing, and they just are not the same thing. I mean, the first real progressive was Theodore Roosevelt. He was a Republican, and he was conservative. I think progressivism is about what do we need as America to move forward, you know, to improve the human condition. In some cases, it means to conserve. In other cases, it means to be more liberal. But to answer your question about, you know, more specifically, I think that there is, you know, if we're ultimately improving the human condition by empowering them personally with money in their hands to be able to make their own independent choices, whether it be an entrepreneurial or whatever, you know, stay-at-home mom, then I don't think that that smacks counter to the progressive message. And I don't think that, you know, clinging to an apparatus, you know, social programs is the answer. Mainly because I think we can see that, you know, there's an enormous amount of money and a lot of decisions that are made and a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of red tape, but ultimately, even more importantly, a lack of autonomy that comes with government programs that you lose. Because it's sort of someone else getting to say whether or not you qualify for this or not. And you have jumped through all these loopholes. And I think that's sort of more about being anti-American, in my opinion, because it's not really liberating. It's not really freeing. So that's why I consider myself more of a new progressive, not really a progressive in the modern sense of the term, which I think a lot of people, unfortunately, have misconstrued to mean the Bernie camp or the socialist camp. And they're just not the same thing. They're not even related. Has nothing to do with capitalism, socialism. It's a philosophy. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it's who knows? Maybe if I think about it more, maybe I might identify with a new progressive approach, because when I hear progressive, I do immediately think of massive, giant government programs that are, you know, 1,000 pages long kind of thing, with like committees and agencies and all this kind of stuff. And that gives me the lot of heartburn, because I'm like, man, they're going to tax me, and that's not even going to go to the people that need it.
Well, you can definitely thank the both the Democratic Party and the GOP for the branding, you know, like the misbranding of what it means to be progressive. I think GOP, you know, when you think about people like, I can't think of his name, Glenn Beck, I think it was, other people like that, Prague University, you know, they're really good at framing progressives as sort of the eugenics group that, you know, is all about socialism. And if you look back in the early 1900s, Theodore Roosevelt had his own party, and socialists had their own party as well. I don't remember who it was. Was it Eugene Debs? So they actually were competing against one another, and they actually had arguments about, you know, Theodore wanted, you know, more of a light approach to humanizing the industrial sector, whereas Debs, he was more of that other part that wanted it to be more social and more heavy, and workers' rights and things like that. So they just don't mean the same thing. And of course, the Democrats, they don't want to move away from the center, and so they're threatened. It's much like the GOP is threatened by the Trumpers. I think they see that sort of as a threat to them being able to ultimately win. Maybe it looks too radical to the sort of middle of the road American. I think so. That's why they sort of paint us in not really the best light as well.
One thing that has come up that occurred to me in this conversation about 2024 is I think a lot of us have assumed that, oh, well, if Trump loses, then, he goes back to, his Trump Tower or Mar-a-Lago, or wherever he spends time. And maybe he starts like a news channel or a media kind of business, but he'll be gone. He'll be like Sarah Palin, he'll be off into the distance. Maybe he has a show on Fox, who knows? But I actually saw some headlines saying that he would be a strong candidate for the 2024 Republican nomination if he lost. Mm-hmm. Do you think that this guy will reemerge 4 years from now if he loses to Biden?
Yeah, that's a good question. If I think about Donald Trump, I don't see him as the type of person that likes to go back to something that he, is where maybe he feels he's not welcomed. He likes to go where adulation is. He likes to sort of lick his wounds, and so I think I see him more using, as sort of the first thing you were hinting at, media. Whether it be a news network, whether it be just a way to reinvent himself to the American people. He's an icon. He's not going anywhere. I don't see him running again in 2024. I really don't. I don't think he's that. I definitely think he can be vindictive, and I think he can carry a lot of like animosities and you hurt my feeling and need for revenge, that type of thing. I'm going to show you I don't like to lose. But I think he also he's really good at reinventing himself, whether it be the media, whether it be his money in his Trump Towers, rather it mean getting into politics. He will just figure out a way to move somewhere else. That's where I see him likely going.
Right. So your view is if he loses, he'll go to where he can get more validation, and he probably wouldn't want to risk losing twice, because losing is probably the thing that he seems like he hates the most. Right. It's just is
he's
losing.
All about winning. I mean, he's one thing you can learn from Trump, and there's a lot of things I don't like about his approach, his policy, but also if you think about. He's good at understanding that you go where you're welcomed, you flatter people, you carry a good image, you don't think bad of yourself, you champion, you keep going, you keep winning, you do whatever you can to win, you go where you can win. And that's a good lesson, in its own way, I think to carry. I can definitely learn from that. I think sometimes I'm very self-degrading, so I think that that's one thing that at least I feel he's taught me is the importance of understanding you have a value, you have something to offer, and there are people out there that are going to like you if you just go find them.
Yeah, I mean, at the same time, sometimes great change and great. The greatest moments in history are when people did things where it was hard and it was improbable. I'm guessing I'm not sure. Were you happy with the Obama years, or did you feel like they were very disappointing? Or
now I would say that I'm I think it was far better than the way a lot of social media on the left painted it. Granted, I do agree with a lot of criticisms about, particularly, the drone strikes and his policy with the immigrants at the border. It wasn't as heavy-handed as Trump's, but there were questionable moments. I think he didn't set forth some of the progressive policy he promised, but in the overall, I mean, he secured more public lands than any president prior to him. He put more money into climate change. He changed the infrastructure to meet the electric grid, like in terms of electric vehicles that didn't exist in 2007. I mean, he really did a lot. He put us in the Paris Accord, the Iran Treaty. Allies loved us. Our image abroad improved greatly. So I think that he was more successful than a lot of people on the left give him credit, unfortunately. So I would say like a B minus, C plus. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. I was quite pleased with him. And I guess I feel like everything you described, you look at ACA, you look at reducing our footprint in Iraq for sure. You look at the Supreme Court appointments, the financial crisis, getting out of that, and that's a great example. When you look at the leadership style for the financial crisis that Obama had to deal with and the COVID crisis that Trump had to deal with, I feel like the Trump playbook is to assign blame elsewhere, either Democrats or other countries, and take credit for anything good that's happening. I don't remember Obama doing a victory parade at all, even though there was a point where a lot of us were concerned, like, is this whole global financial system about to just collapse?
Yeah, I think you're actually right. And I think that's one of the areas that didn't help Obama. He was not good at presenting his accomplishments. He didn't speak to the American people about the positives and where we were going as a nation. He didn't do enough to connect to the base. And I think that ultimately really hurt his image. Trump is really great at that, and he's really good at turning things in his favor. And some of it's believable if you listen to him long enough. Of course, I don't believe most of it, but even the fact he's able to convince me on some of it is pretty astounding. I mean, it goes to show you that stay connected, because even a little bit of the thing that good that you did, you can articulate that and get that out there. That can get you some support. Keep support. And Obama just didn't do that.
What did Trump convince you of?
Oh. I don't know. I think I would say not necessarily. Maybe I used the wrong term. I do think sometimes the media goes overboard on him, and I can see where he feels attacked at all angles. They didn't really give him an opportunity. At the same time, he is corrupt, and he borderline breaks the law and all those things. That makes sense. But I just feel like it's it's on hyperdrive, and it makes it difficult not to have some empathy for him, like to sort of side with him and feel Americans love an underdog. Americans love to, we're all about going out and defending people, and that's what we're about, like think about what we do internationally. I mean, so if you got somebody on the corner, Americans are ready. We're the ones that put out American, like the superhero movies. So I think it's hard not to have some degree of I don't know if you want to call it empathy, maybe it's too strong of a word, but some understanding of what he's saying when he says, look at the mass media, look at the way they are, look at the way they portray everything, look at what they focus on, and so.
Yeah, I will agree with you. I'll say this. I've noticed I hate to use the term that he uses, but on both sides, people seem to have a tendency lately to self-trigger. So as an example, I have some MAGA family members who are really, really big fans of the president. And we have these like, family chat rooms where we're debating constantly. And one of my MAGA family members is so fixated on two issues, Black Lives Matter and transgender rights stuff. And you would assume that like this was the Biden-Harris #1 priority, is like, he's like, look, Disney has a trans character in a cartoon and your kids are going to watch these trans characters, see what they're doing to our America. I was like, dude, nobody's talking about trans stuff like it's the #1 issue. Like, you are grabbing onto this because it makes you feel righteous and you like to get angry about stuff. None of us are worried about this. And then he's like, well, what about these like open borders? Like, you just want to send buses into Mexico. It's like, where are you getting this shit? So, and I think I also, in fairness, have seen the same, perhaps on some folks, myself, in moments of weakness where I see anything that Trump does, I'm like, that jerk, look at him. He's trying to withhold additional funding from the USPS. And maybe he's not actively defunding them. Maybe he's just refusing to give them more money. And there, of course, there is some nuance there. And of course, there's going to be risk of more fraud anytime you have more of anything. Mm-hmm. And I just feel like we've gotten into this world where we're so tribal. It's not just that we're tribal, but I feel like we are looking for reasons to increase the polarization. And it gives us this weird chemical, kind of pleasure in a very sad way to make the other side as completely demonic as possible.
Yeah. I think part of it has to do with there's a lot of restlessness in America. We know that we need something to happen. So many people being left behind. So many people feel like the world is changing too quickly. Whether it be women's rights, whether it be gay rights, whether it be now trans rights. So a lot of the values, if you will, of a good part of America, it feels like that's slipping away, and that's what they identify with. That's where they have their sentiments. And so naturally they're going to look for anything to cling on to that because it's what they're familiar with. And it also represents their ideology. I'm a conservative, I'm a Republican, I'm a GOP, and my mother before me, my father before me, so forth and so on. So I've got my legacy that I need to secure. I feel like it's slipping out of my hands. And then on the other hand, a lot of people are desperate, and they feel we need to change, we need to move forward, and they're becoming impatient. They're seeing their people die and they can't pay their health care, etc., or they get evicted. And so, yeah, it becomes very personal. And I think that those two clash. And you have to find a leader that knows how to. It's sort of going full circle here. I think you know where I'm going with this, but who just knows how to tap into both of those. That understands what's going on systemically. I think that's what ultimately what we're going to continue to see, Tom, until that happens, until we have someone that can step into that role and know how to balance those, harmonize those two needs, bring people to consensus.
Yeah, if only someone would run who could speak to both sides. Gosh darn it. I know we're running short on time. I want to do two things. One, I want to share a little bit of data on 2024 stuff because there's some interesting Yang numbers in there. And then secondly, we'll take some audience questions. So folks in the live chat, if you have questions for Josh or myself, now is the time to put it in the chat. Just put in caps like question colon so I can scan.
Is this silly of me? I didn't even know we were live.
Oh yeah, man.
Hey everybody.
Yeah. I think there's about 80. There's 56 on YouTube. Concurrence right now is probably like 20 or 30
Awesome.
on Twitter. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm more self-conscious now.
Oh yeah, never mind. Forget it. There's no live.
I'm just joking. This is
All right, here's some cool data. Look at this. First choice for Democratic primary in 2024. We talked about how Yang was really in the top 5 among Democrats. But if you ask the general population, he goes from 8% to 14%. He's tied for second. Isn't that crazy?
Yep. Tom, what does the red and pink or red and blue mean? Do you know what that is?
I think it's just the difference of color to indicate there's no real difference.
Maybe like 10% versus those below 10%. That's what it looks like. Well,
yeah, it could be. Could be. Yeah. Okay. Although what's interesting is then the shades. Well, I guess it's the shades between the blue doesn't seem to represent anything because the 2 6s are the same, are different blues. But regardless, only Buttigieg and Cuomo, and probably this again is pre-announcement. So he would be certainly in the top 4. Yep. I mean, Yang has more appeal to the general population than AOC for sure. Whereas within the Democratic Party, AOC kind of edges out Yang.
I think she's going to have a huge hill to climb if she gets, wins the primary, unfortunately. So I think that's more the reason why going with someone like Yang makes more sense if we want to win in a general in 2024. But I wanted to ask you, did you hear about Pete Buttigieg saying that he's part of the Yang gang now? And what are your thoughts about that?
I saw that. I think he said it tongue in cheek because they were talking about, you guys are both great and it will be fun to see you duke it out. And then Yang was like, oh yeah, we have a pact. And then Buttigieg was like, yeah, I'm Yang gang now. I think Buttigieg has a very bright future. I don't think he's ready to play second fiddle to Yang anytime soon. But I think the fact I do like that both of them represent a big part of the future of the Democratic Party and a very bright, energetic, kind of very erudite, literate, thoughtful kind of wing of the party. And that's great, man. I think if I was even thinking a Yang Buttigieg ticket, that would be pretty sweet. Right. I guess it's fun how a lot of us are more excited about 2024 than 2020. I mean, we'll see what happens, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's see if there's any questions in the chat. I'll see if I can pick a couple there. Oh, someone actually, I don't know if it was a question for us, but I saw some people talking about foreign policy. Have you been following the UAE Israeli stuff and that deal and the whole basically Jared's initiative in the Middle East? Do you have any? What's your thought? What's the MPV point of view on foreign policy?
Yeah, I mean, that's a difficult one. I do think that American presence is important abroad for global balance, especially if you think about Putin, who is changing his constitution to rule till 2034, and you have a lot of strong men. The global texture is changing. Duarte and Brazil, Bolsonaro, now Poland. You do see some creeping of that sort of ideology, which I consider to be sort of semi-monarchy approach to politics. So I do think it's important that we do have some presence. I don't think that is a big of a question to me as the way we go about doing it. I think you've got to have the American people behind you. You've got to have Congress. You got to go about it legally. I'm not object to us being involved in wars as long as, again, Congress is involved and the American people are in support of that.
So Trumper has a very specific question. He wants to know, what do you think about getting out of the Iran deal? We just talked about a little bit about the UAE stuff. Do you think this was like a huge foreign policy win?
I agree on the second part, the Israel UAE. I think I give kudos to Trump on that. I think it will be a positive for him. Might give him a couple points in the polling. As far as Iran, I do think that I don't necessarily disagree that Trump is criticizing the treaty. I think that there's some problems with the treaty. But on the other hand, I would have liked to have seen him have something in place to replace it with, right away, rather than just sort of leave a vacuum there. I think that could be problematic, and so that concerns me.
Yeah, maybe not a surprise to Trumper. I'm a little more critical of President Trump's kind of results from a foreign policy point of view. I mean, I think the American stance on Israeli Palestinian relations has been anything but balanced and neutral. I think it's very clear that Trump is clearly in favor of, the kind of the Netanyahu position on things. And as a world power and world leader, like, if we're going to broker deals, you can't be seen like Jared Kushner was driving it. Like, Netanyahu literally slept in Kushner's bedroom when he visited, and of course Kushner would go in the living room or whatever. But like, that's a tight kind of relationship. And if I were on the Palestinian side and someone was like, yeah, Jared Kushner is going to negotiate this deal and, everything's going to be fine. And the UAE thing, I don't want to go on a soapbox, but like, the Israelis, all they've done is said they're going to suspend occupying more territory. That is not a huge concession, in my opinion. So, yeah, I feel like we get involved in too many other countries' foreign internal affairs and bilateral relations, but if we do have to, we should try and play as neutral and kind of dispassionate a role as possible. And I feel like we're stacking the deck in favor of the Israelis in those deals. And so, to me, I feel like then it's not going to get buy-in from the kind of Arab nation.
Yeah, I think my counter to that would be, I think that I agree with the two-state solution. I do think Palestinians are not heard. They're being abused. It's sort of an apartheid system, but
Yeah.
I think that if Biden had made some successes with an agreement with Israel and UAE and pulling back on occupation, I think we would have championed that. And I don't think there's any reason we shouldn't do the same for Trump. Do I think that it is, a big deal? No, I don't. I think it's still a step in the right direction. I think it's a good thing. Is it political? Perhaps. I don't know. But I also think that Trump is honest about our relationship with AIPAC and Israel. He doesn't hide it. I think that if you go to the Democratic Party, they're just as in love with AIPAC as the GOP is, and at least with Trump, you know what you're getting. That's part of his characteristic that I like is that at least he's upfront about nearly everything that he says he represents. He's not, he lies, of course, about everything, but at the same time, he's not being around.
You know where he's coming from.
His agenda is right.
Yeah, you totally know where he's coming from, and he doesn't. I mean, I think he celebrates the fact that he and Netanyahu are great friends, and
right.
He's all for that kind of Netanyahu wing of the Israeli political scene. It's funny. I have friends who are Israelis, and what they often remind me is that Netanyahu is incredibly unpopular with about half of the country. And basically he's like their Trump. And so they're always saying to me, like, hey, can you please tell your fellow Americans that being pro-Israel is not mean being pro-Netanyahu. You're basically supporting one half of Israel that's always in sort of this back and forth. And it's a good point. Like, I think we try and make it very monolithic when it's not.
Right. Yeah. We never confuse the governments with the people of a nation. I think that often gets confused. And I just wanted to point out that we also, I think, need to keep in mind, continually remind ourselves that Israel is really the only democracy in the Middle East. And so I think that we do have interest there. And, you know, I think it is a difficult thing to balance that with the needs of the Palestinian people.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, that is, I don't want to make it sound like, oh, success for Trump would have been the kind of deal of the century kind of thing.
Yeah.
You know, I just feel like he's not an honest broker. I think he's very clearly pro Netanyahu on these things. And you know, if folks that are listening to this are in that camp, then he's your guy. Let me wrap up with this, Josh. Are there any topics that we haven't touched on that you wanted to chat about before we wrap?
No, I think you really covered a lot of good material, so I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, it was. It's always a pleasure having you on, Josh. I let me ask you one final question then. What is something that you you know, a topic that you feel is very interesting that we in the Yang Gang are not talking about enough, or that we're getting a little bit wrong, or we're not seeing a nuance that you feel kind of is pretty important?
I think there's sort of an oversight in regards to the way we're sort of being caught up in the political typical stream of the way things unfold when it comes to the way we approach, I wouldn't call it anti-establishment politics, but anything that's not sort of the power structure. I think we're falling into sort of the Bernie trap. And I think early on, you know, the Bernie people were all getting along, and you know, Bernie attracted a lot of GOP as well, and independents, and even Trumpers.
Yeah.
So it's not as though we don't have some commonality there. And what you saw happen through the course of time is there begin to be a lot of divisions and people that wanted to go in different directions. And I think we need to respect that. You know, early on, people wanted to vote Green Party. They wanted to go Bernie or bust. Some people wanted a People's Party. And we're seeing that happen among the Yang Gang as well. And we shouldn't look at it as a threat nor as a insult, but as a good thing, because it means that we're drawing in a variety of people, and that's what democracy is all about, you know. And I think that we all get caught up in it. I've gotten caught up in it. I've taken sides. I've criticized people. I've said things I regret. But I think that we all need to learn from that and understand that the more the better. You know, we don't have to agree on everything. If it's UBI and a few other things, you know, human-centered economics, things like that, we agree on, and we disagree on Trump, Biden, that's great. Let it be. Let it rest. You know, we share that commonality. And I think ultimately my biggest message is we need to focus more on growing and inviting, not being exclusive, but inclusive. And again, going back to the central theme of what I keep trying to emphasize is getting votes, you know, getting more and more people interested and getting more and more people ready to vote. That's the key to winning ultimately.
And that's the only way we're going to get out of this like 4 to 6% range. I mean, if we have this 20-point purity test on like, well, you're humanity first, but you're not, because on 0.7, you don't agree with this. Like, we'll always be on the fringes.
Right.
If we can rally behind basic income and maybe one or two things, frankly, if it's just basic income, I think that would be great.
And you know, Tom, I don't want people to misunderstand me. When I talk about that, I'm not suggesting that you can't attack, you know, Trump, or you can't attack Biden. You know, that's a completely natural thing to do. You know, if you want to point out something about Trump and why you don't like him or you don't like Biden, you know, stick with the candidate. Don't start going after each other. If you see someone post something that you don't like about Trump or something they don't like about Biden, don't take that as a personal affront.
Mm.
Just simply appreciate that. That's the complexity of politics in America. If you want to debate it, have a cordial conversation, maybe you'll learn from each other. Don't go in trying to persuade or convince. And I'm not saying that I do all these things, but I'm just sort of throwing that out there.
Oh no, it's a great point. And I noticed that especially during the Unity 2020 kind of stuff when that was like a thing. And I remember I was feeling, as you can tell, I do really feel like we need to have Trump out of the White House. And so I was like, hey, there's freaking 100 days left. Like you can support your third party later. Like we need to get this guy out, and it needs to be a clear sweep, and it needs to be a landslide, because I don't trust this guy to just like go away quietly. And I think a lot of people were saying like, whoa, way to vote shame us. Way to discredit like the kind of rights of individuals to vote their conscience. And for me, it's like, look, you got to do what you think is right. It's your vote.
Yep.
But I also have a right to express my opinion.
Yeah.
And
I don't think you did anything wrong. I've watched your videos. I think that, simply stating that this is what you believe, we really need to get Trump out. I think he's threatening democracy. I think third party, is not viable. I think it's going in the wrong direction. Those are all your opinions, and you have a right to them. I think what it comes down to is you start blocking people, you start insulting them, and saying you're not reading, you're stupid, things like that, or I can't believe you're supporting Trump, or I can't, you're a loser for supporting Biden, you're a sellout. Those are things that I'm more getting at, that I think that we don't need to have that.
Yeah. And I should clarify, Emerald DX is reminding me that Unity 2020 is still a thing, and I refer to it in the past tense. I think what I meant to say was that the intense drama between Yang Gang about Unity 2020 seems to have passed, and people are like, hey, people are going to go do their thing, whatever they want, and we're going to try and avoid like, going personal, because I agree with you. Like once you start one thing I've noticed is that anytime you start introducing labels, it degrades the conversation.
Right. Exactly.
So like, I've seen people say, oh, you're supporting Biden, you're such a neo-lib, or you're such a corporatist, or you're such a establishment.
Or you support Trump, you're a racist,
right?
So forth and so on. Like people have their own reasons why they support a candidate, that imperfect candidate as they are, and attack the candidate. If you want to call Trump a racist, go for it. But to call, someone who supports Trump a racist, I think that's going the wrong direction. Yeah,
I agree with that. I mean, at the end of the day, ultimately, people want to take care of their family. They want to have a good life. They want to feel safe. Like, we all come from the same place. Our core needs are the same. We just have disagreements on how to get there. So hopefully we can keep that in mind. And Josh, it's always such a pleasure having conversations with you. I feel like we got to get you back on the show and make this a recurring one, maybe every couple of months or something.
Oh, that would be awesome. I appreciate the offer. Yeah, anytime. And same thing on NPV. So you're always welcome there.
Right on. So folks, if you didn't know who Josh was, you got to go to NPV. Like, I find it very thoughtful, a little bit kind of like an NPR vibe. It's like, it's not a lot of like, no clickbait. it's not like woohoo. It's more like, let's break this down and let's talk about it kind of as thoroughly as we can. And so I think the spectrum of Yang Gang related content is really diverse. And sometimes you want that kind of like really super energy stuff. And there's amazing channels for that. And then sometimes you want to make a big cup of tea and put this on while you're, while you're organizing your closets. Like the MPV is like the place to really be like, whoa. Or if you have a long car ride, I feel like MPV is the way to go. Awesome. So folks, please check it out. Subscribe to New Progressive Voice. You will not regret it. And he's been doing it for a long time, and I think you'll continue to do it. And it's been such a pleasure. So thank you. Have a great Sunday. And with that, we're going to say goodbye, nerds.
Goodbye, nerds. Goodbye, nerds.